They say some storms come to cleanse the land. Others? They just aim to bury what's left of you. Zeke Callahan wasn't looking to be saved, wasn't looking for company. He'd buried love long ago, along with a name carved into weathered pine and a future that never came. But that November night, when the heavens split open and the land turned to muck, fate put a woman in the mud and 7 children in his path. And Zeke? He had a choice to make. The rain came down like judgment, angry, cold, unrelenting. Not the kind of rain that gave life to fields, but the kind that drowned horses and peeled the soul off a man's bones. Zeke Callahan tugged his coat tighter as his mare slogged through the rising muck. He was bone-tired, saddle-sore, and ready to disappear behind the crooked door of his cabin 3 miles north. Just fire, dry boots, and silence. That's all he wanted. But then he heard it. At first he thought it was an animal, a dying coyote maybe. But as he turned toward the sound, peering through curtains of rain, the truth stabbed straight through the storm. A child's voice. "Help! Somebody, please help us!" Zeke kicked the mare into motion. What he found would stick to his ribs for the rest of his life. Beneath a trembling oak, barely offering more shelter than a lie at a poker table, huddled 7 children. The oldest, no more than 14, stood in front, chin high, soaked to the bone, her arms spread wide like she could hold the sky off her siblings. "Please, mister," she stammered. "Our mama—" She pointed with a shaking hand. Zeke followed her gaze. 20 yards off, half submerged in the mud between a tilted wagon and the twisted trees, lay the still form of a woman. He didn't think. He just moved. Boots sank with every step as he charged through the sucking earth. When he dropped to his knees beside her, the lightning gave him his first look. Apache. Early 30s, maybe. Mud clung to her braids, her lips tinted blue, breath barely there. He pressed fingers to her throat. For a heartbeat, he feared she was already gone. Then, there. Faint, but alive. "She's breathin'," he called over the storm. "Is she gonna die?" the girl asked. "Not if I can help it." He scooped the woman into his arms, nothing but bones and cold, and turned to the girl. "You got a name?" "Sunsi," she said. "Them's Bowden, Nala, Ayasha, Hakan, Lena, and that's little Coco." Zeke nodded. "I'm Zeke Callahan. My cabin's north. 3 miles. Think y'all can make it?" "We'll crawl if we gotta," she said. He believed her. The walk was hell. Mud sucked at their feet. Wind slapped their faces. Tiva, he didn't know her name yet, felt like dead weight against his chest. But Sonzi kept asking, "Is she still breathing?" And every time he answered, yes, even when he wasn't sure anymore. By the time they reached his cabin, half ruin, half sanctuary, Zeke's legs were shaking. He kicked the door open. "Sunsi, matches are on the mantel. Get that fire going. Rest of you, inside fast." He laid the woman on his bed. Cold as creekstone. He and Sonsi got her out of the soaked dress, into one of his old shirts. It wasn't proper, but it was dry. He covered her in every blanket he owned. Then he looked at the girl. "Climb in beside her. You're gonna warm her with your body. Bring the rest of your kin." 7 children curled around their mother like petals around a dying flower. Zeke sat in his chair, soaked and shaking, and whispered, "Don't you die on them. Don't you dare." And quieter still, "Maybe, don't die on me either." The rain didn't stop. But inside that cabin, a fire began. One that didn't need matches. Like stories forged in storm and survival. "Then saddle up. Hit subscribe and ride with us to see what happens next. There's more coming. This family's just getting started." The fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the log walls. Zeke sat in his old chair by the bed, boots unlaced but not off, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of the woman's chest. Tiva, Sonsi had called her. He hadn't slept, not really, just stared, listened, and waited, like a man standing guard over something he didn't understand but knew he couldn't afford to lose. Outside, the storm hadn't let up. Rain still hammered the roof like a grudge not yet spent. The wind moaned around the eaves, rattling the shutters like bones in a gambler's cup. But inside, the air had changed. Warmer now, thick with smoke, damp wool, and the scent of fear slowly giving way to something like hope. Tiva hadn't stirred. Her skin was still far too pale, and her breathing shallow, but there was warmth returning to her cheeks. Barely. It was the children, Zeke figured. 7 of them, curled around her like a human quilt. Bowden had his head on her shoulder. Little Coco clutched her arm in sleep, her thumb still in her mouth. They were worn out, soaked through just hours before. But now they were heat and life, wrapped around their mother like a promise. Sonsi, lying closest, stirred. Her eyes opened, sharp and watchful even in sleep. "She's still breathing," Zeke whispered before she could ask. Sonsi nodded slowly, then whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." Zeke waved it off, but the lump in his throat stayed. He wasn't used to this. Not the thank yous, not the softness, not the way this little cabin of his, meant for one man and no memories, now breathed with voices and warmth and something dangerously close to family. He rose stiffly, joints crackling, and threw another log on the fire. Then he ladled more hot water into a tin mug and brought it to Sonsi. "Drink this. Keep yourself warm. You're no use to your mama dead on your feet." She sat up carefully and took it. "How do you know what to do?" she asked, her voice low. Zeke hesitated. His hands tightened around the tin kettle. "I don't," he said. "Not really. I lost folks too. Long time ago. I know what cold does. I know what it takes from you." He didn't say more, and she didn't ask. That was the way of folks out here. Some things didn't need to be spoken outright to be understood. The firelight played over Tiva's face. Her eyelids fluttered once. Then again. Zeke stepped closer, watching. "Sonsi," he started, but the girl was already leaning in. "Mama?" No response. Zeke reached out, touched the woman's forehead. Still too cool, but not ice anymore. The color wasn't quite right, but it wasn't death gray either. "We're holding her steady," he muttered. "That's what matters now." Bowden stirred in his sleep, then sat up. "Is it morning yet?" "No," Zeke said, "but it will be soon." He meant more than daylight. He meant something shifting. In him. In this cabin. In the life he'd sealed off long ago. They stayed that way for hours. Zeke, Sonsi, the pile of sleeping children, and the woman hovering between 2 worlds. And when dawn finally bled its way through the frost-blurred window panes, Zeke let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Tiva was still alive. And for the first time in 8 years, so was he. The morning crept in slow, shy, and silver, like a dog that had been whipped too many times. The storm had moved on, but left its mark behind. Mud in the floorboards, damp in the corners, and a silence thick as molasses hanging over the cabin. Zeke Callahan sat slouched in his old chair, boots planted wide, hands cupped around a tin mug of coffee gone cold hours ago. He hadn't slept, Not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he'd see that woman's face, mud-caked, blue-lipped, close to gone, and feel again the weight of her bones in his arms. But now her color had changed. A touch of pink back in her cheeks. Her lips weren't that awful shade of gray anymore, and her chest, bless it, kept rising and falling, slow but sure. He was just about to rise and check her pulse again when her hand twitched. Then her eyelids fluttered. Zeke froze, like a deer spotting the muzzle flash. Her face tightened, her brows pulled, and she gave a low, pained groan. Her eyes opened, not wide, not clear, but they opened. "Mama?" Sansi's voice cracked from across the room. She scrambled off the floor like a shot, nearly tripping over her sister to get to the bed. "Mama, you're awake! Oh, Lord, you're awake!" Zeke stood slowly, not wanting to crowd, but not able to keep his feet planted either. He stepped close enough for her to see him, arms folded to keep from fidgeting. Tiva blinked up at them, eyes glassy with confusion. Her voice, when it came, was a scrape of wind through dry grass. "Where?" "You're safe," Sansi said, gripping her mother's hand. "We're all safe. This man, Mr. Callahan, he brought us in out of the storm. We're in his cabin." Zuck cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you've been out near 12 hours. Caught a bad spell of cold. We got you warm best we could. You'll be all right now long as you rest." Tiva turned her head toward him. Her eyes were the dark kind, the kind that saw more than they should. She tried to sit up, but the room must have spun on her. She fell back with a grunt. "My children," she rasped. Zeke nodded toward the fire. "All here, all fed, all fine." She looked. Sure enough, the little ones were there, piled together like pups, still deep in dreams. Bowden stirred and sat up, saw her awake, and his face lit like sunrise. He didn't say a word, just nodded once, man to woman, like he'd been holding something heavy and could finally set it down. Tiva's eyes closed, tears slipping down the corners. She breathed deep. "Thank you," she whispered. Zeke shifted. "Ain't nothing. Anyone with a scrap of decency would have done the same." "No," she said, barely audible, but steady. "They wouldn't have." She was right, and Zeke knew it. Plenty of folks would have kept riding, told themselves it wasn't their problem, but he'd stopped. And now his cabin was full of life he didn't ask for, and wasn't sure how to handle. "You need broth," he said, escaping to the fire. "Ain't fancy, bone and veg, but it'll put warmth in your belly." She tried to take the cup from him herself, but her hands trembled like dry leaves. He steadied it without comment. She drank slow, like it hurt to swallow, but with each sip, something came back into her. Color, strength, fight. When the cup was empty, she looked at him again, her voice steadier this time. "How long can we stay?" Zeke didn't miss a beat. "Long as you need." Tiva nodded once, like that answer mattered more than he knew. And somewhere between the firelight and her daughter's hand on hers, she leaned back into the pillow and exhaled like a woman who, for the first time in a long while, believed she just might make it. The fourth day brought clear skies and frozen ground. The storm had run its course, leaving behind a battered trail of broken limbs, churned up soil, and one overrun cabin full of barefoot kids and borrowed grace. Zeke Callahan stood outside, splitting logs in the early sun, breath fogging the air. Each swing of the axe bit hard, not just into wood, but into the silence that had ruled his life for years. Now that quiet was long gone, drowned out by small footsteps, the clatter of tin cups, and the sound of children learning how to laugh again. Inside, Tiva sat propped in his chair, a wool blanket draped across her lap, her strength coming back slow but steady. Her hair, clean now, hung in a thick braid down her shoulder, and her eyes followed her youngest, Coco, who toddled around the room with a piece of cornbread like it was gold. The place looked nothing like it had a week ago. Where once it had been cold, still, and painfully neat, now it was cluttered with blankets, small boots drying by the fire, and a row of tiny socks strung across the mantel like odd-colored bunting. It should have felt invasive. It didn't. Zeke didn't say much that morning, but he noticed everything. How Bowden took to the axe naturally once Zeke showed him the proper swing. How Nyla insisted on helping with the fire, her tiny hands eager to learn. How Tiva watched them all, eyes half proud, half pained, like it hurt to see them being children again. Later, while the younger ones napped, Zeke handed Bowden a wedge and mallet. "Let's talk about wood grain," he said, voice even. "It'll fight you less if you aim for the cracks." Bowden nodded like it was scripture. That boy had hunger in his eyes, not just for food, but for direction, for a man's voice that didn't carry anger or absence. Out back, Tiva had shuffled outside and found what was left of Sadie's old garden. She knelt beside it, still weak but determined, and ran her hands through the brittle remains. It was mostly thistle and dead roots, but her fingers moved gently, reverently, as if she were praying with the soil. Zeke noticed her out there and walked up quiet. "That patch has been dead 3 years," he said. "I've seen worse come back," she answered, not looking up. He didn't know what to say to that, so he handed her a trowel. She took it without a word. By dusk, there was a little cleared space, nothing more than a bed of churned earth. But it was something. Life scratching back through the cold. That night, the cabin was filled with smells Zeke hadn't known he missed. Cornmeal frying, dried herbs steeping in broth, and the warm, earthy scent of people who belonged. Tiva stirred the pot like she owned the stove, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't need help standing. As the fire crackled, Zeke sat back and watched his home come alive, with noise and breath and motion. Coco giggled in her sister's lap. Bowden was patching a hole in his sock like he'd done it 100 times. Tiva caught Zeke's gaze, and for a second, neither looked away. She smiled, just a little, but it hit him like a mule kick. Something was shifting, something deep, and it terrified him just as much as it comforted. Zeke Callahan had faced grizzlies, Comancheros, droughts, and men with loaded guns and hollow hearts, but nothing had him tied in knots like sitting across the cabin from Tiva, watching her laugh soft at something Coco said and feeling like his ribs couldn't hold the ache building underneath. It had been 8 days since he carried her from the mud. 8 days of broth and firewood, of patching blankets and passing glances. 8 days of trying to convince himself that what he was feeling was just kindness, mercy. But it wasn't, and tonight, with the fire dying low and the children tucked in like fence posts under quilts, he couldn't hold it in no more. Tiva was by the stove, rinsing the last of the tin plates. Her hands were steady now. She moved with purpose, not weakness. A woman reclaiming her place in the world. Zeke cleared his throat. "Tiva," he said, his voice low and rough as gravel. "Can I speak plain for a moment?" She turned, drying her hands on her skirt. "You always do." He shifted, suddenly unsure what to do with his own arms. "I don't want you to leave." The words hung there like smoke that wouldn't clear. Tiva blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "I know it ain't proper. I know it don't make a lick of sense. But this..." This house has felt like a home since you and those children came barreling in. He looked down, jaw clenching. I ain't felt that in years, not since Sadie. Tiva stood still, back straight, her expression unreadable. I'm not saying I expect anything, he added quickly. You got every right to pack up and move on, find whatever land you meant to settle. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope you'd stay, all of you. For a long, breathless second, the only sound was the fire cracking low. Then Tiva stepped closer. You should know, she said softly. My marriage to Taza wasn't what most folks think. Zeke frowned. He wasn't kind to you? He was kind. He was good. But we weren't lovers. Our marriage was arranged. To save me from disgrace. She paused, glancing toward the sleeping children. Bowden isn't his. Zeke's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. He just waited. Tiva's voice was quiet now, but steady. I was young, foolish. There was a man. He left before Bowden was born. My family was ready to cast me out. Taza stepped in, offered his name, his roof. He never asked for more than I could give. Zeke breathed in slow. You loved him? I respected him. I mourned him. She looked up at Zeke now, her dark eyes full of strength and scar tissue. But I never gave him my heart. He nodded, jaw working like he was chewing something too big for his mouth. Then, without another word, he reached across and took her hand. Rough against rough, two lives full of bruises finding quiet in the middle of it all. I'm not asking for your heart tonight, he said, but if you ever decide to give it, I'll be right here. Tiva didn't answer with words, just squeezed his hand, firm and certain. And in that moment, with wind brushing the shutters and the fire painting shadows on the walls, Zeke Callahan felt something crack open in his chest, a place that had stayed locked since the day he buried Sadie. Something was beginning, and this time, he wasn't going to run from it. The cabin had settled into a kind of rhythm, not quiet exactly. Between Coco's squeals, Bowden's wood chopping, and Ayasha's knack for knocking over every cup she touched, it was never silent. But it was steady, warm, alive. And that scared Tiva more than the storm ever had. She watched Zeke from the doorway as he hitched his mare to a fresh-cut sled made from an old barn door. He was showing Hakan how to tie a proper knot. Patient, firm, a teacher without ever calling himself one. The boy's face beamed under that praise like he'd just won a prize at a county fair. Tiva's chest tightened. That night, after the children were asleep, Tiva lit the lamp low and called them all to sit on the floor. Zeke stood by the hearth, arms crossed, leaning back like he meant to stay quiet. But his eyes never left her. I need to speak with you, Tiva said, folding her hands in her lap. All of you. Sonsi sat up straight, her chin already set like she was bracing for bad news. Bowden narrowed his eyes. The others just blinked, confused and drowsy. Tiva looked them over, every beloved face, every soot-smudged cheek, and felt her throat tighten. Zeke and I, she hesitated. He's asked us to stay, not just until spring. For good. There was a silence, heavy as snowfall. We wouldn't be just guests anymore, she continued. We'd be building a life here, together. But this ain't a decision I make alone. We've all lost so much, and I won't ask you to trade one unknown for another. Sonsi was the first to speak. We already made that trade when you collapsed in the mud, Mama. We didn't know him, but he didn't leave us. I trust him, Bowden added, voice rough but clear. I've learned more from him in a week than I did from any man back home. Nala nodded quickly. I want to stay. I like the horse, Coco mumbled, still half asleep, curled in Lena's lap. That got a chuckle from the others, even Tiva. Zeke shifted by the fire, rubbing the back of his neck like he didn't know what to do with all that praise. Tiva looked up at him, something soft in her gaze. "They want this," she said. "But you need to understand something too, Zeke. I'm not coming here just to cook and warm beds. If I stay, we're building this together, as equals." Zeke met her eyes, solemn. "Wouldn't have it any other way." She rose then, slowly, and reached for his hand in front of the children. No shame. No hiding. "I choose this," she said. "I choose you. Not out of need, not out of fear, but because I see something here I didn't think I'd ever feel again." Zeke's fingers closed around hers, firm, calloused, sure. "Then let's build something that lasts," he said. That night, as the wind whispered through the pines and the fire burned low, the cabin held more than just warmth. It held choice. It held promise. It held the beginnings of a family not born, but chosen. Winter didn't knock. It just showed up one morning with frost on the windows and a bite in the wind that made even the stove grumble. Inside the cabin, things had settled into something that almost felt like a life. Tiva stirred stew over the fire, while Bowden whittled a spoon. Coco sat on Zeke's lap, her hair in tangles, hands sticky with dried apple slices. The others buzzed in and out like bees around a hive, carrying firewood, folding laundry, bickering in that way only siblings could, sharp but rooted in love. Zeke had never known noise could be a comfort. That's when the hooves came. Steady, measured. Too even to be freight, too slow to be danger. But wrong. Zeke was already up, setting Coco down and reaching for the rifle by the door. Tiva turned, eyes narrowing. "Someone's coming," he muttered. Through the frost-blurred window, a figure emerged. Lean, ragged, with a long coat heavy with dust and time. The man swung down from his horse like every joint hurt, then just stood there, staring at the cabin like he wasn't sure it was real. Tiva's breath hitched. She took one step forward, then froze. Her hand went to her chest. "No." Zeke turned. "You know him?" She nodded slowly. "That's Taza." For a heartbeat, the whole room stopped breathing. Bowden rose, face pale. The younger children didn't understand, but they felt the shift, the way the warmth drained from the room and something colder than snow slid in. Zeke stepped back, setting the rifle down slow. "You sure?" "Yes," Tiva whispered. "But he died, a year ago. We buried him." The door creaked open, and the man stepped inside, blinking against the lamplight. He looked thinner than memory. Gaunt, almost hollow. But the eyes? They hadn't changed. "Tiva?" His voice cracked. "Is it really you?" No one moved. Not Zeke, not the children, not even the fire, it seemed. Tiva stepped forward, knees trembling. "We buried you. You were gone. I woke up 3 weeks later. They'd buried a man in my name. I spent a year searching." He looked at the children. "My family was gone, and I followed every whisper, every wrong road until I found you." Coco clung to Sanse's skirt. Bowden stood between Taza and the others, uncertain, defensive. Zeke stepped back, giving space, giving something else too, a silent surrender, or maybe just decency. Tiva swayed, caught between two lives. Zeke met her gaze. "Whatever you need," he said simply, and stepped out into the cold. She stood in the middle of the room, heart pounding so hard it hurt, as Taza took one step closer. "I've come to bring you home." But the truth was, she'd already built a new one. The tension in the cabin sat thicker than chimney smoke. Even the boards in the floor seemed to hold their breath. Taza hadn't said much after he stepped through that door, but he didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to send everything sideways. He walked the place like a man counting what used to be his. His eyes roamed over the walls, the hearth, the children. Then they settled on the bed, Zeke's bed, where folded quilts and a woman's shawl lay neatly at the edge. He didn't speak until morning. By then, Zeke had taken to the barn, sleeping with the mule and a stack of hay bales, letting the man reclaim the roof without raising a fuss. Tiva hadn't asked him to leave. She hadn't said anything at all, but he'd known enough to step back. The children picked up on the unease. Ayasha had stopped humming. Lena clung to her sisters. Bowden stayed close to the door with his jaw set tight and his hands balled in his pockets. And Sansi? She just watched Zeke disappear into the cold, watched Taza claim his seat at the table like the last year hadn't passed, watched her mother grow quieter by the hour. That morning, over weak coffee and leftover cornbread, Taza finally leaned forward and spoke. "We pack today." The words dropped like a hammer. Tiva stiffened but didn't answer. Taza kept going. "We leave by sunup tomorrow. This place, it ain't ours. Was never meant to be. I got kin near Santa Rosa. We'll ride there. Start fresh." Silence. He looked at her, then at the children. "I'm your husband. Your father. I came back. Ain't that what matters?" Sonsi stood slowly, her voice low but sharp. "Where were you when Mama fell in the mud? When we were starving under that tree thinking she was gone?" Taza's jaw tightened. "I was buried alive, girl. Crawled out of my own grave just to find my family missing. That's not our fault." She stepped closer. "And this man, Zeke, he didn't know us, but he carried Mama through 3 miles of freezing rain. He gave us a fire, gave us food, gave us hope." "I ain't saying he didn't help," Taza snapped, "but he don't belong in this family." "Maybe not," Bowden said, rising to stand beside his sister. "But maybe you don't either. You think just showing up makes you a father again?" Taza's face darkened. "I did what I had to do." "You left her once," Sonsi said, voice trembling now. "Don't you dare force her to leave again." Tiva's breath caught. She rose slowly, her hand brushing Sonsi's arm as she passed. "I'm not the same woman you married," she said, meeting Taza's eyes. "I've changed. I had to. I've seen what love looks like when it's chosen, not just bound by a vow made in another lifetime." Taza stared at her, speechless. Zeke watched from the shadows outside, hat in hand, not daring to move. Tiva turned toward the door, toward the open land and frost-kissed pines. "I'm not going anywhere, not this time." The frost was clinging to the high grass when Abel rose before the sun, same way he had every morning that season. His breath clouded the air as he saddled Buckshot, the leather creaking in the quiet, just him and the gray hush before daybreak. But that morning wasn't like the others. This time he wasn't just chasing chores. He was chasing an answer. Nita had been gone since the night before, left without a word. No footprints near the barn, no rustled blanket by the hearth. Just the thin scent of pine resin and the fading memory of her voice telling Jace a story before bed. Abel rode hard toward the ridge where she sometimes went to think, the one overlooking the canyon. When he crested the hill, there she was, standing still as stone, wrapped in her faded shawl, wind tugging gently at her braid. "You weren't sleepin'," she said, not turning. "No," he answered, dismounting. "Wasn't." They stood like that a while. The canyon stretched out below, carved deep by time and water, a reminder that nothing lasted except what endured. "I didn't want to leave," Nita said finally, "but I needed space to breathe." Abel nodded, though the knot in his gut hadn't loosened. "You thinking of leaving for good?" She turned to face him. Her eyes weren't angry. They were calm, heartbreakingly so. "I came here to start again, Abel. Not to be saved, not to be owned. I just needed to know if stayin' was mine to choose. And now? I don't know yet." He studied her face, the quiet strength in her jaw, the sorrow she carried like a second skin. "I ain't trying to hold you down, Nita, but I'm tired of walking beside you like a ghost you ain't sure should be there." She looked away, her voice catching. "I've lost every place I ever called home. Every man who promised a future left me carrying the past. You're different, Abel. But that don't make this easy." "No," he said quietly. "It don't." Down in the valley, smoke was starting to rise from the ranch house chimney. The day was waking up whether they were ready or not. "You've built something good here," she said. "For Jace, for yourself. For you too," he added. She smiled then. Just a flicker. "Maybe. But good things don't grow if they're forced." He walked over, slow and careful, and placed something in her palm, a rusted horseshoe nail, twisted into a crude loop. "Found it when I rebuilt the fence. Bent it into a ring without meaning to. Figured maybe it meant something." Nita stared at it for a long time, then slipped it into her pocket. "I'm not saying yes," she whispered. "I ain't asking, just hoping." The wind shifted. Down below, Jace ran out of the barn, waving something over his head. Abel watched, heart thick with things he didn't know how to say. "You still got time to change your mind," he said to her. She stepped closer, brushing his hand. "And so do you." They rode back together, side by side, but still separated by a space no trail could bridge. But the trail wasn't over yet. The wind carried a cool hush across the plains that night, brushing soft against the dry earth, whispering through the old mesquite trees. It had been days since the fighting, yet the land still felt tender, like a wound beginning to scab over. At the edge of the property, Clara Harkin leaned against the split-rail fence, arms folded, watching the dark settle over everything she'd come to know. Behind her, the cabin was aglow with lamplight. Inside, Naya and Tala sat cross-legged near the fire, threading beads and hushed laughter into something that resembled peace. The baby, Eli, slept bundled near the hearth, his breath light as cotton. That small, steady sound reminded Clara why she'd stayed when she could have ridden away. Sani stepped out from the barn, hands stained with saddle oil, the scent of leather still clinging to him. He moved with a quiet grace, the kind that comes from carrying too many burdens for too long. His face was shadowed, but when he looked at her, there was something softer in his eyes. Not forgiveness, maybe not even understanding, but something close. Acceptance, maybe. "You fixed the fence line," Clara said, voice low and calm. He nodded. Didn't want the wind tearing it apart before morning. They stood a moment in shared silence. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Just real. Clara took a breath. "I keep wondering if Lilu would have done it different. Maybe she would have known what to say to make it all right." "She'd have stayed too," Sani said, quiet but sure. "But she wouldn't have carried the guilt you do." Clara turned to face him. "I didn't save her, but I saved them. That's the kind of math we have to live with," he replied. A coyote howled in the distance, one long, mournful note. Sani looked out into the darkness. They'll keep testing us. The ones who don't believe Apache and white folks can build anything together. You ready for that? No, Clara said plainly. But I'll be here anyway. His jaw tightened, but there was pride in his nod. He turned and started back toward the house. She stayed a moment longer. The stars blinked awake above her, scattered and untamed. The kind of sky that didn't offer answers, just space enough to hold your questions. She looked back at the cabin, where laughter now mingled with the pop of the fire. And she wondered, not for the first time, what would you have done if it had been your land, your child, and a woman like me knocking at your door,